So we've spent a lot of time focusing on this crazy divisive issue in the life of the church right now, and I don't say that with any to minimize it at all. It's a very important and deep dividing issue. But one of the voices that we hear throughout this conversation is there's ministry to do outside of this, intersecting with and beyond the divisive issues surrounding the church's attitude and inclusion or exclusion of LGBTQI plus people. And so, just to remind us that the core of the work that we do is about vital ministry that affects the lives of people and the health of communities. We turn now to the Innovation Vitality team, the IV team, to tell us, remind us what it is that we're about and what's on the docket for the year ahead. So welcome, William and Leroy and Christina.
Thank you, Bishop. Well, good morning. Have you ever found yourself in one of those moments when you're asking, what in the world am I doing here? Sometimes we can feel like we're so immersed and mired in difficulty that we cannot get anywhere. Anxiety takes over, scarcity rears its ugly head, insecurities bubble up to the surface, and then come the attacks: verbal, strategic, subversive, meanness, ugliness, evil. Maybe this resonates with you personally, but I most want to recognize that it resonates with us corporately. As a church, we are in a season of uncertainty and anxiety. And in the thick of it all, we can each have varying experiences and take different positions. It's part of who we are as human beings. We only have so much capacity before we react and take a posture of offense or defense. And sometimes it feels like it's better to just run away from it all, to just give in to the pressure and walk away. Sometimes in these moments we are acting selfishly out of fear and stress, and sometimes we see opportunity or an advantage. The notion of something new, something completely unlike the current, can upset and mess up our sense of security and leave us in a place of retreat when instead it's time to lead boldly. I want to begin this morning with a familiar story. And since we're in a room full of church leaders, I will not give you the backstory, but I'm sure you will recognize it. It comes from 1 Kings chapter 19. But the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah replied, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Often, we are so busy talking and screaming and hiding in the midst of chaos that we are unable to listen and take action. What are you doing here? What are we doing here? Did you know that the word new has more than 15 different definitions in the dictionary? In the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition that grips me the tightest defines new as unfamiliar, strange, which is specific to new places. Now, I cannot tell you how many conversations I've experienced in the context of the United Methodist Church where assessment of circumstances and design of ministries happened without listening to the very people we are trying to reach. Before I was a United Methodist pastor, now approaching almost 20 years, I was an entrepreneur specializing in marketing and business startup. And I can tell you that the quickest way to failure is to try and reach a target audience without listening and learning. Who in their right mind would roll the dice in such a deliberate way with significant money on the line? And then I became a United Methodist pastor and discovered that's been our formula for a very, very long time. It's a formula that was birthed out of the church growth movement in the early 60s during a season when people were flocking to the church. We didn't have to do a whole lot. And it's clearly not working, as indicated by our slow decline almost since our formation in 1968. And then at the 1972 General Conference, we doubled down by adding language to the Book of Discipline that alienated our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. And we've been trying to attract people back to church since the backdoor leak started decades ago. Instead of joining in the movements that have often sparked our very own neighborhoods. The church has provided ministry to and for the communities in which it serves rather than work with people who are not represented around our planning tables. The church has labored faithfully to serve, and yet its strategies and methods have more often been firmly left in the past. In other words, culture has outpaced our ability to adapt and change. Instead of celebrating our unfamiliar strangeness, the church has often labeled everything else as unfamiliar and strange. Consequently, we often make plans and implement strategies to reach new people without ever listening to and learning from the very people we are trying to be in relationship with. Clearly, the church, as we know it, is changing. And it's going to change into something new, maybe even something unfamiliar, strange, and exciting if we don't mess it up. And in the greater Northwest Episcopal area, which includes Alaska, Oregon, Idaho, and our Pacific Northwest conferences, we have a beautiful head start stepping into this great unknown of God. Yet sometimes when we get caught up in the chaos of uncertainty, we forget the good work we are doing. And God has to ask us again, what are you doing here? So in the midst of this chaotic and uncertain time in our church, I would like for us to pause and be reminded that you are on the leading edge of change. And we've not only been engaged faithfully in ministry, but we have a lot of work to do. A foundation on which to continue to build something unfamiliar yet familiar, strange yet exciting. On behalf of the Innovation and Vitality team, my awesome colleagues, Ms. Christina Gonzalez, Director of Innovation for an Inclusive Church, Reverend Dr. Leroy Barber, Director of Innovation for an Engaged Church, and Reverend Shalom Agtarap, Associate Director of Innovation for a New Church. Allow me to share some beautiful unfolding that has taken place over the last few years. It has positioned the United Methodist Church in the Northwest to be on the leading edge of something new, whether we fully embraced it or not. Under the banner of the Greater Northwest area, in the fall of 2015, we began collaborating more intentionally around cross-conference resourcing, where the goal was to scale our ability to serve a vast area, the largest Episcopal area in the United States. We worked to implement new development processes and to put into place systems that would allow us to better steward our financial and human resources and to cultivate the beginnings of aligned strategies in 3 very different conference cultures. Our cabinets began meeting together as an area, and relationships between leaders deepened. Under the leadership of Bishop Stanovsky, we began to implement, learn, and pivot. Implement, learn, and pivot. Since our 3 annual conferences began co-creating under the banner of the Greater Northwest Area, we have identified, recruited, assessed, and deployed 53 church planters and innovators across the area. We have launched 42 new projects. In this same time frame, we have also ended 9 projects, all of which provided valuable learnings that contributed to our stepping deeper into the innovation that our context demands. We have trained 83 pastors and innovators through our Multiplying Ministries cohorts. 28 of those are church planters, and 55 are existing church pastors. In 2018, we formalized this collaboration across the conferences, named the Innovation Vitality Team, and identified the practices of inclusion, innovation, and multiplication as evidence of vitality. We coordinated and held 6 ordinary revivals across the Greater Northwest Area, which engaged and connected more than 1,000 church leaders and community leaders from the neighborhoods. We helped coordinate and lead 2 Vitality Summits, one in September and one in April, that were designed to strategically align our vital resources across our annual conferences toward new and significant Greater Northwest initiatives. We have focused our 4 areas of resources that are necessary in post-Christian context, and they are faith-based community organizing, asset-based community development, intercultural competency, and intentional multiplication. With the help of Eric Walker from Vashon United Methodist Church, we have worked to improve the processes of how we support the district superintendents in their role as chief missional strategists, and improved how we both prioritize and scale our work. We have placed 17 interns of color, 10 last summer, 14 this summer, and 3 coordinators, and initiated a pilot high school internship program for students of color in Burien. There have been over 160 IDIs, individual development inventories, administered across the area, including multiple sessions with the cabinet. And we have set intercultural competency as foundational to our work, and led numerous trainings to confront isms while working to address white privilege and implicit bias. We have successfully multiplied out of existing and/or new churches 7 times, 2 of which have now come out of the DNA of Valley and Mountain, which itself chartered in 2017. And bold new visions of multiplication are being cast by pastors who are preparing their churches for the common good of their neighborhood. The Board of Congregational Development recently heard from the 2018 and 2019 new project innovators. Heather Sparkman, who leads Steamboat Island Church in partnership with the South Sound United Methodist Co-op. Norman Feliciano, who leads Squamish Fellowship, multiplied out of First United Methodist Church of Canada, another chartered church in our conference. And Kate Kilroy, who leads Better Together, Alternative Community, multiplied out of Marysville United Methodist Church. To say that the board was excited about applied learnings and the fruitfulness of season 1 and the deep listening that it required would be an understatement. In 2019, we are launching 6 new projects and 3 new Greater Northwest initiatives. And we are super excited about these. They include, and these are huge by the way, 2 new multicultural hubs, pilots, one in Portland and one in Tacoma, led by incredibly talented leaders of color, which will become centers of research and development for new expressions of church, learning spaces for pastors and church leaders from across the region, and centers of multiplication, raising and deploying new leaders that create new places for new people. And we are formalizing the next phase of the Rural Church Engagement Initiative, which is led by district superintendents of the Sage, Crater Lake, Seven Rivers, and Inland districts, and coordinated by the lay leader of the Crater Lake District, Lynn Egley. The total number of new vital projects across the greater Northwest area now equals 47. And we need you to know this. Of those 47 projects, 23 are being led by people of color. If you've entered this space wondering what you are doing here, know that your faithfulness and work has yielded a solid foundation from which to lead. This will demand from us that we listen deeply to our Creator, who breathes into us new life. This will demand from us that we listen deeply to our neighbors, those who are marginalized, minimized, and pushed outside the centers of privilege. This will demand that in order to become a more inclusive and diverse expression of what church can be in post-Christian context, that we will have to intentionally create space for younger, people of color, and queer leaders to have dominant voice and agency in our work. This will demand that a church represented by 94% white members understand that we need to decenter ourselves so that new voices can shape our future. Do you see the irony? I'm the white team leader, centered at the mic, standing in front of 3 people of color, speaking into a possible new future. And to my white brothers and sisters, we often are blind to this reality. Listen, we are on the verge of something new, something unfamiliar, strange, and exciting, if we are willing to do some hard internal work and boldly lead. If we are more culturally self-aware, then we engage difference. If we are culturally competent, then we confront power and privilege and all isms. If we embrace difference and our uncomfortableness, then we are not threatened by different expressions of faith traditions or cultures. If we have different people and voices around the table, then we are on the road to innovation. If we engage power mapping of our communities, then needed intersections are created. If the institution is flexible enough, then we will see new expressions, new places, new people, new leadership. If disciples are present and exemplify Christ, then discipleship is encouraged. If leaders are identified or developed, then leadership is replicated and new ways of leading are evident. If assets are leveraged appropriately, then sustainability and multiplication are achieved. And if we can, in this season of something new, listen to the gentle whisper of God, we can come face to face with what got us here in the first place and step out boldly from our hiding places and lead into a vital, new, unfamiliar, strange, exciting future. So, what in the world are you doing here? Bishop, this concludes the report of the Innovation and Vitality team.